It started, as these things often do, with an email. Not even a phone call, mind you, despite all the years, all the holidays, all the scraped knees I'd kissed better. An email with a subject line that chirped, "Baby shower fun," and a digital invitation card that was entirely too pastel and had entirely too many stylized little strollers. It landed in my inbox like a tiny saccharine hand grenade. I opened it, my heart doing that familiar little hopeful flutter it still insists on doing, even after all this time, all the letdowns that have paved the road behind me. It was for Maya. Of course it was for Maya, my daughter-in-law, or rather my former daughter-in-law, though you wouldn't know it from the way my son, David, still insists on binding us together with twine spun from his own convenience and selective memory. The invitation listed dates, times, a registry link I had no intention of clicking, and beneath it, in smaller, elegant script, a note from Maya herself. It wasn't addressed to me specifically, but was a general little piece. Sayat at the bottom of the digital page, ostensibly for anyone who might have questions or need directions. I sent a simple reply, hitting reply all because that's how the digital world works, isn't it? Forced inclusion, even in exclusion. Thank you for the lovely invitation. Maya, what a joyous occasion. I'd be delighted to attend. A simple, polite line, the kind of thing you type without thinking, the social lubricant of the polite world. I waited, and I waited. Days passed. The thread filled with chirpy RSVPs, animated emojis, questions about parking, dietary restrictions. Everyone seemed to be responding except the hostess, the mother-to-be, the orchestrator of the fun. A knot began to form in my stomach, a cold, hard stone of familiar dread. It was happening again, the slow fade, the silent treatment, the message delivered not through words but through their absence. Finally, David called. His voice was hesitant, layered with that particular brand of forced casualness he employs when he's wading into uncomfortable territory he himself created. "Mom," he started, and I knew that Mom said it all. It wasn't the warm greeting of a son calling his mother. It was the bracing inhale of someone about to deliver bad news. They are vaguely ashamed of, but entirely complicit in, about the baby shower. He trailed off, waiting for me to fill the silence, to make it easier for him. I didn't. I just held the phone, the silence stretching taut between us, a wire humming with unspoken accusations and ancient hurts. "Yeah?" I prompted, my voice deliberately flat, giving him no quarter, no easy out. He sighed, a heavy put-upon sound. "Look, Mom, Maya saw your RSVP. Here it comes," I thought. The excuse, the deflection. She's
Oh, she's a little stressed with the pregnancy, you know?
hormones and everything. I said nothing. Hormones, the eternal scapegoat for every piece of unkindness, every deliberate slight. It was just, no. She felt like maybe, with everything going on, thought it might, not ruin the vibe. The words hung in the air, ugly and sharp. Ruin the vibe. Me, his mother, the woman who had changed his diapers, read him bedtime stories, paid for his college, nursed him through a broken heart, sold her own dreams piece by piece to give him opportunities she never had. I would ruin the vibe. It was a quiet statement, delivered with a kind of embarrassed mumble by my son, but it landed like a physical blow. It wasn't just about a party. It was about worth, about belonging, about whether after all these years I was still considered acceptable, still considered family. Ruin the vibe. The phrase echoed in the sudden cavern of my chest. It was a perfect distillation of their attitude towards me. I wasn't a person with feelings, with a history, with a right to be present for a significant family event. I was a potential disruption, a sour note in the carefully orchestrated symphony of their perfect pastel lives, a vibe ruiner. The anger, hot and unfamiliar, began to coil in my gut, a counterpoint to the cold stone of hurt. But beneath the anger was a deep, weary resignation. This wasn't new. It was just bolder, more public, They were excluding me from the celebration of a grandchild I was desperate to welcome. A tiny new life who would carry a piece of my own lineage, and they were doing it with this flimsy, insulting excuse. Maya, the woman who could charm a snake out of its skin when it suited her, but whose eyes went cold and distant the moment she felt I wasn't performing the role of the grateful, quiet, unobtrusive mother-in-law correctly. And David, my son, standing by, enabling it, delivering the message like a craven messenger boy, using hormones and stress as shields for his own lack of courage and loyalty. Ruin the vibe. The words took root, embedding themselves deep within me. They weren't just dismissing my presence. They were dismissing me. My entire being, my history, my very existence seemed in their eyes capable of spoiling the carefully constructed facade of their perfect, happy family narrative. It wasn't the first time, not by a long shot, that I had been made to feel like an inconvenience, a relic of a past they preferred to forget or rewrite. There had been the passive-aggressive comments about my house. "Oh, it's cozy." The thinly veiled suggestions about my clothes. "That's a choice, isn't it?" The endless stream of helpful advice on everything from my finances to my health. None of it requested. All of it delivered with that sickly sweet, condescending tone that Maya had perfected. She was a master of the subtle put-down, the compliment that was actually an insult, the offer of help that came with a barb attached. And David had simply learned to look away, to pretend he didn't see the subtle digs, didn't hear the dismissive tone. He had built a comfortable life for himself, and that comfort seemed to rely on not upsetting the delicate balance. Maya maintained, even if it meant sacrificing his mother's feelings on the altar of domestic tranquility. I remembered the first time I truly saw it, the shift in their dynamic. It was shortly after they got married. We were at my house for dinner, and I had cooked all the dishes David loved as a child. Roast chicken, mashed potatoes, green bean, comfort food. Maya had smiled brightly. "Oh, Martha, this is just adorable," she'd said, the word adorable landing strangely, as if she were talking about a quaint, slightly dusty antique. Then she'd produced a small, elaborately wrapped package. "I brought dessert," she announced, pulling out a minimalist, architecturally designed pastry that looked utterly out of place on my worn kitchen counter. "It's vegan, gluten-free, and uses only ethically sourced cacao nibs harvested by moonlight." She'd said it with a little laugh, but her eyes had challenged me, daring me to offer my simple apple pie. David, bless his oblivious heart, had just beamed. "Isn't she amazing, Mom?" And I had smiled, that same weary, practiced smile, and said, It's unique, dear. Unique. Adorable." Words that built a quiet wall between their modern, sophisticated lives and my own, which suddenly felt hopelessly dated and provincial. This wasn't a sudden change. It was a gradual erosion, like waves wearing down a cliff face. Each little slight, each ignored phone call, each canceled plan, each piece of unsolicited advice had chipped away at my sense of belonging, at my confidence, at my belief that I was a valued part of their lives. The baby shower exclusion wasn't the first stone. It was the one that finally cracked the foundation. The house, my house, the one I had poured my life and love into, the place where David grew up, had become a symbol of this disconnect. They visited less and less, always finding excuses. Too far, too busy. The traffic was bad. When they did come, they seemed restless, uncomfortable, as if the worn furniture and familiar smells were somehow beneath them. Maya would perch delicately on the edge of the sofa, making small, polite conversation, while David fiddled with his phone, occasionally chiming in with a non-committal grunt. It felt less like a visit and more like an obligation they were enduring. They wanted the idea of family, the comfort of knowing I was there if they needed something. But they didn't want the messy, imperfect reality of spending genuine time with me, acknowledging my history, my feelings, my worth. They wanted the grandmother figure, the one who would coo over the baby, provide free childcare on demand, and ask no questions. make no demands, and certainly never ever ruin the vibe. And now, even that carefully defined role felt too much for them. I wasn't even fit for passive cooing from the sidelines of a party. I was to be erased entirely from the celebration, deemed a potential contaminant to their carefully curated joy. Ruin the vibe. The phrase played on repeat in my mind. A broken record of hurt and indignation. I hung up the phone with David, my hand trembling slightly. For a long moment, I just stood there, in my kitchen, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the familiar linoleum floor. It felt quiet, too quiet. The silence after a storm, perhaps, or before one. The hurt was still there, a heavy ache, but something else was stirring now, something cooler, sharper. It was the feeling of a line being crossed, a limit reached. They had pushed me, gently, at first, then with increasing disregard, to the very edge of their lives. And now they had asked me to step off completely. But what if I didn't? What if, instead of shrinking away, I pushed back? Not with anger or dramatics. That was their expectation. The crazy old lady trope they likely used to justify their behavior to themselves and others. No, something quiet, something precise. Something that would disrupt their carefully constructed world in a way they wouldn't see coming. Ruin the vibe. They were so afraid. I would ruin the vibe. The idea bloomed slowly, tentatively at first, like a single, unexpected flower, pushing through concrete. It was dangerous. It was risky. It would undoubtedly cause an explosion, but it would also shatter the carefully constructed facade of their lives, expose the manipulation, the disrespect for exactly what it was. It would invert the power dynamic, taking the control they wielded so effortlessly and placing it for a brief, potent moment firmly in my hands. And then I thought of him. Mark, Maya's ex. The baby's father. The man whose name was spoken only in hushed, angry tones in David's presence. A ghost in their narrative. A chapter Maya preferred to keep firmly closed and unread. The father they seemed to have decided wasn't necessary for the celebration of his own child's impending arrival. He was absent from the email invitation, from the cheerful RSVP thread, from the plans David occasionally let slip. Just like me, another inconvenient person, swept under the rug of their perfect life. Another vibe ruiner, I supposed. I didn't know Mark well. I'd met him a few times when he and Maya were together, before things went spectacularly wrong. He seemed quieter than David, perhaps more thoughtful. I remembered a dinner where he had listened patiently while Maya held court, occasionally offering a wry observation that made me smile. He hadn't been part of the family long enough to fully adopt their air of entitlement and casual cruelty. His name surfaced in my mind, not as a target of malice, but as a fellow traveler in the land of the discarded. He was the father, excluded from the shower celebrating his child. I was the grandmother, excluded, for fear of ruining the vibe. There was a symmetry there, a strange dark logic. They had both been deemed surplus to requirements for the main event, for the curated show. What if? What if they weren't? What if one of them at least was given the opportunity to attend? The opportunity I was being denied. The thought solidified. Sending him the invitation. It wasn't about spite, not purely. Or perhaps it was a sophisticated kind of spite, one aimed not just at causing discomfort, but at forcing a reckoning. It was about revealing the hypocrisy, the selective nature of their family values. It was about injecting a dose of inconvenient reality into their carefully constructed fantasy. Ruin the vibe? Oh, I could ruin the vibe. Not by being quietly present and disapproving, as they seemed to fear, but by bringing the very person they had so deliberately excluded back into the picture, by highlighting the missing piece. The father who was also deemed unworthy of being celebrated alongside the mother. It felt goes, when you're right. A sense of quiet purpose settled over me, chasing away some of the immediate hurt. It wasn't a sudden explosive anger, but a cold, deliberate decision born of years of patient endurance. They wanted me to disappear quietly, to accept their dismissal with grace and understanding? Not anymore. The grace was gone, worn thin by repeated use and zero reciprocation. The understanding had curdled into a clear-eyed view of their self-absorption. This wasn't about getting revenge in the traditional sense. It was about disruption. It was about reminding them that the people they chose to exclude had agency, had connections, had the potential to alter the narrative they so desperately controlled. It was about saying, without saying a word, that I saw them, I understood their game, and I refused to play by their rules any longer. The next step was gathering information. I didn't have Mark's contact details. Maya had scrubbed him from her social media presence with the efficiency of a professional cleaner, erasing him from their shared history as if he had never existed. David rarely mentioned him, and when he did, it was with a shrug or a dismissive comment about that whole mess. But I knew someone who might. My neighbor Mrs. Gable was a repository of local knowledge, a quiet observer with an uncanny ability to know everyone's business without ever appearing to pry. She wasn't malicious, just informed. Her grandson, Billy, was about the same age as Mark and David, and had run in some of the same circles before heading off to university. I baked a batch of my famous lemon scones, the kind that usually elicited a cheerful invitation for tea. Armed with the baked goods and a carefully constructed casualness, I walked next door. Mrs. Gable welcomed me warmly, her small house smelling of lavender potpourri and old paper. We talked about her hydrangeas, the ridiculous price of groceries, the upcoming town festival. Then, steering the conversation gently, I brought up David and Maya, the impending grandchild. "Oh yes, a baby," Mrs. Gable said, her eyes twinkling. "Such a blessing. And little Liam must be thrilled about being a big brother." Liam was Maya's son from a previous relationship, whom David had adopted. I nodded. "Yes, he seems excited. They're having a baby shower soon. A big fuss, you know how Maya likes things just so." A delicate pause. It makes you think back, doesn't it, to when David was a baby. And then when Liam came into their lives. And well, even thinking about Mark, Liam's father, it feels like only yesterday they were all settling in. I watched her face carefully. She stirred her tea, her gaze distant for a moment. "Mark," she said, drawing out the name. "Yes, a quiet boy. Always seemed decent enough. Though you never truly know, do you?" Another pause, just long enough. He moved out of town after things ended. Went upstate, I believe. His mother, Eleanor, still lives here though. A lovely woman, Eleanor. We're in the same book club. And there it was. The threat, not Mark directly, but his mother, Eleanor. I didn't know Eleanor well, but I knew of her. She was a quiet presence in town, volunteering at the library, known for her kindness. Unlike Maya, she wasn't a performance. I finished my tea, thanked Miss Gable for the delightful chat and the information she hadn't even realized she'd given me. I had Eleanor's name, and knowing she was in the book club with Mrs. Gable was as good as having her phone number in this town. A few strategic questions over the next week. Casual mentions of Eleanor during conversations with other acquaintances I ran into at the market or the post office, and I had it, Eleanor's address, her phone number, and a general sense of where Mark was living upstate, a small town called Willow Creek. The decision solidified. I wouldn't contact Mark directly. Not yet. That felt too much like interference, like getting my hands dirty in the actual drama between him and Maya. My target was the invitation itself. It was the symbol of exclusion, the physical embodiment of their message to me. I needed a copy. Getting hold of one wasn't difficult. David had sent me a physical invitation initially, before Maya's vibe concerns kicked in. I had put it aside, not wanting to look at it, but hadn't thrown it away. It was in a drawer in the hall table, tucked beneath old mail and forgotten keys. I retrieved it.
Heavy cardstock, embossed edges, that same sickly sweet design. It listed the venue, a swanky local event space, the date, the time, the registry, everything a guest would need.
And it didn't list a host, Just join us in celebrating baby Miller.
Miller was David's last name.
No mention of Mark, of course. He was persona non grata. Finding Mark's address in Willow Creek was slightly trickier, but not impossible with a little quiet searching online and cross-referencing names and potential relatives. It felt strange, almost clandestine, typing his name into search engines, piecing together fragments of a life I only knew peripherally. There was no social media presence for him either, which suggested he valued his privacy, or perhaps was just avoiding the very public life Maya embraced. I found a potential address associated with his name and his mother's address. History. It felt like a gamble, but a calculated one. The physical invitation was key. A scanned copy wouldn't have the same weight. It needed to be the real thing, or at least appear to be. I didn't want to send the original. I might need it later as proof, however unlikely that seemed then. I went to the local copy shop. The woman behind the counter, a cheerful young woman named Chloe, knew me by sight. "Morning, Mrs. Harris. Just need copies today." I nodded, placing the invitation face down on the counter. "Yes, dear. Just need a few copies of this." "A baby shower invite," I added, offering a small smile. She slid it onto the scanner. "Oh, how lovely. Someone you know?" she asked idly, adjusting the glass lid. "Yes," I said softly. "Someone I know very well." The machine hummed, a bright light, scanning the details. I asked for 3 copies, on similar heavy cardstock. If possible, Chloe found some that were close enough. The copies came out crisp and clear, perfect replicas of the original exclusion. I paid, thanked her, and walked out, the heavy cardstock copies feeling strangely potent in my hands. It wasn't just paper anymore. It was leverage. It was a statement waiting to be delivered. The act of copying the invitation felt like crossing a threshold. There was no going back now. The plan, however simple, was in motion. I had the means. Now I just needed to execute the delivery. It wasn't enough to just send the invite. It needed to arrive, to be seen, to cause the intended disruption. The timing had to be right. Not too early, giving Maya time to intercept or mitigate. Not too late, missing the impact of the shower itself. A few days before the event seemed ideal. Enough time for it to reach him, for him to process it, for the possibility of his attendance to become real. But not enough time for Maya to completely neutralize the threat. The thought of her face when she saw him there, or even just when she learned he had received the invitation, sent a ripple of something akin to satisfaction through me. It wasn't a cruel joy, not exactly, more a sense of impending cosmic justice. They had tried to erase me, to pretend I didn't exist, or at least didn't matter. I was merely reminding them that the world and the people in it didn't always conform to their carefully edited version of reality. Mark was a reality check they had deliberately omitted, and I was sending him back. The sheer audacity of it. For me, a woman who had spent decades trying to keep the peace, to be agreeable, to not make waves, was exhilarating in a quiet, private way. It was an act of rebellion, small in scale perhaps, but enormous in its personal significance. I was tired of being the quiet one, the overlooked one, the one who swallowed her feelings for the sake of everyone else's comfort. They had deemed me a vibe ruiner. Fine, I would live up to the title. The envelope was plain, hand-addressed. I didn't want anything fancy, nothing that would draw unnecessary attention before it reached its intended recipient. I used one of the copies of the invitation, folded it carefully, and slipped it into the envelope. Finding the correct postage for upstate wasn't complicated. Standing at the mailbox at the end of my driveway, the cool metal against my fingertips, I held the envelope for a moment. It felt heavy, pregnant with potential consequences. This wasn't just mailing a piece of paper. It was mailing a catalyst, a disruption. A mirror held up to their carefully constructed hypocrisy. My heart hammered a little against my ribs. What if it didn't reach him? What if he ignored it? What if he called Maya, warning her? What if it escalated things beyond anything I could handle? The old fears flickered, the ingrained habit of caution, of not rocking the boat. But then I thought again of David's hesitant voice, the casual cruelty of ruin the vibe, the years of feeling invisible, undervalued, dismissed, and the resolve hardened. They had made their choice. Now I was making mine. I lifted the flag on the mailbox and slid the envelope inside. The small metal clang as the flag dropped felt disproportionately loud in the quiet afternoon. It was done. The die was cast. All I could do now was wait. The waiting was the hardest part. Every phone call, every text message, every casual encounter felt charged with unspoken possibility. I maintained my usual routine, watering the garden, going to the library, chatting with Mrs. Gable. On the surface, nothing had changed. Internally, I was a tightly coiled spring, vibrating with tension and anticipation. I saw David a couple of times in the days that followed. He seemed busy, slightly stressed, talking about the shower preparations. Maya was apparently deep into linen choices and floral arrangements. The vibe, it seemed, was being meticulously curated. He didn't mention my response to his call, and I didn't bring it up. We circled around the obvious topic, talking about everything and nothing, the unspoken truth hanging between us like a thick fog. His inability to even acknowledge the hurt he'd caused was in its own way another layer of the dismissal. It was easier for him to pretend the conversation hadn't happened, to pretend my feelings weren't relevant. This passive avoidance, this polite erasure, had always been his default setting when faced with emotional complexity he didn't want to handle. It was Maya's manipulation perfected through his inaction. He was a good son in many ways, reliable, responsible, successful, but he lacked that fundamental empathy, that willingness to step into another person's shoes, especially if those shoes were worn and maybe a little dusty, like mine felt compared to the shiny new footwear of his current life. He was a product of his environment, perhaps, shaped by a culture that valued appearance over substance, convenience over connection, or perhaps it was simply a weakness in his character, a failure of courage that manifested as polite indifference. Either way, the result was the same. I was left feeling unheard, unseen, and ultimately unvalued. The shower was scheduled for a Saturday afternoon. As the day approached, the tension within me grew almost unbearable. Would Mark show up? Had he even received the invitation? Had he contacted Maya? Had she changed the venue? Had she canceled the whole thing? The possibilities spun in my head, a chaotic vortex of potential outcomes. I imagined Maya's reaction, her carefully constructed composure cracking, her eyes flashing with cold fury. I imagined the awkwardness, the whispers, the sheer unadulterated drama that Mark's unexpected presence would inject into her perfect, pastel celebration. And I felt a strange mix of apprehension and grim satisfaction. This wasn't just about getting back at them. It was about forcing them to confront the messiness they tried so hard to hide. It was about peeling back the layers of superficial charm and exposing the calculating heart beneath. It was about reminding them that actions have consequences, even the quiet ones, even the ones delivered with a polite smile and a shrug. The day of the shower dawned bright and clear. A perfect day for a party. A perfect day, perhaps, for a carefully orchestrated disruption. I didn't have a front row seat to the unfolding events. I wasn't invited, after all, but I knew people who were acquaintances, neighbors, distant relatives who moved in the same social circles as Maya and David. I decided to spend the afternoon quietly at home, tending to my garden. It felt like a deliberate act of centering myself, of finding peace in the simple, tangible world of soil and growing things. A stark contrast to the artificiality of the event happening elsewhere. Dead-headed roses weeded the vegetable patch, the sun warm on my back. My hands, calloused and strong from years of work, moved with a familiar rhythm. These hands had built a life, raised a child, nurtured a home. They were capable hands, not hands that ruined vibes, but hands that created and sustained. This physical work was a balm, a way to channel the nervous energy, the anticipation that hummed beneath my skin. As the afternoon wore on, I found myself glancing at my phone more often than I intended. Would someone call? Would word somehow trickle back to me? The event venue was across town, but in a place like this, news traveled fast, especially news involving a bit of scandal or unexpected drama. I didn't expect a blow-by-blow account, but I was waiting for a ripple, a disturbance in the carefully placid surface of their lives. It was around 4 o'clock, the time the shower was likely in full swing, that the first ripple came. Not a call, but a text message from Carol, a distant cousin who, while technically related to David's side of the family, had always maintained a friendly distance from Maya's inner circle and possessed a healthy skepticism for their perfect facade. Carol's texts were usually brief and to the point. This one was no exception. "OMG, Martha. You will never believe it." My heart leaped. It had worked. He was there. I typed back, trying to keep my fingers steady. "Oh? What's happening?" A pause. Then another text, even more cryptic. The father showed up. Like the father, Maya is losing it. A wave of something complex washed over me. Vindication, yes, but also a sudden sharp pang of anxiety. Losing it. Maya losing it was never a quiet affair. It would be dramatic, performative, designed to make everyone else uncomfortable and rally them to her side. I texted back. "Mark?" Another pause. "Yes." "Who invited him?" "It's chaos here." "Lol." "Who invited him?" The irony was almost too delicious. I didn't reply to that. I just held the phone, a small knowing smile playing on my lips. The father, the excluded father, attending the celebration of his child. It was perfect. It was exactly the kind of inconvenient truth Maya tried to sweep under the rug, the kind of messy reality she preferred to pretend didn't exist. His presence wasn't just disruptive, it was a living embodiment of the history she wanted to erase, the complications she wanted to ignore, and it was happening at her perfectly curated event, in front of all her friends and family. Ruin the vibe? Oh yes. The vibe was well and truly ruined. I could almost see it. Maya, her smile fixed but strained, her eyes darting nervously, trying to figure out how to handle this unexpected intrusion. David, looking bewildered and uncomfortable, caught between his wife's fury and the awkward reality of the situation. The guests unsure where to look, whispering amongst themselves, the carefully placed pastel decorations suddenly feeling flimsy, the carefully planned activities rendered moot by the sheer unscripted drama unfolding before them. The ex's arrival wasn't just an unexpected guest, it was an event horizon, sucking all the air, all the carefully planned joy into its orbit. It was a reminder that life was complicated, that families weren't always neat and tidy, that the people you discarded sometimes had a way of showing up again, often at the least convenient moment. And the fact that I was the one who had orchestrated it, the quiet, overlooked mother who was deemed a vibe ruiner, added a layer of potent satisfaction that settled deep within me. It wasn't about being petty, it was about reclaiming my agency. It was about showing them that I wouldn't just passively accept their dismissal, that I had the power to affect their carefully controlled world. The aftermath was swift and predictable. The calls started that evening. Not from David, of course. His role was primarily one of passive enabler and occasional messenger. The first call was from Maya. Her voice, usually dripping with faux sweetness, was tight with fury, barely contained. "How could you?" she demanded. Without preamble, without even a hello? "How dare you do this?" Her tone was accusatory, as if I had committed some unspeakable crime, not merely facilitated a father's attendance at his child's baby shower. I took a deep breath, centering myself. This was the confrontation I had anticipated. I would not raise my voice. I would not become the hysterical woman they probably expected. "Hello, Maya," I said calmly, my voice steady. To what do I owe the pleasure? My calmness seemed to enrage her further. "Don't play innocent with me, Martha. Mark showed up at the shower. He said he got an invitation. You sent it to him, didn't you? Admit it." Her voice rose, cracking slightly. "I sent an invitation," I confirmed. choosing my words carefully. The one that was initially sent to me before I was told I would. Ruin the vibe. The callback landed. A small, sharp point. There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. Perhaps because I had used her exact phrase. Perhaps because I had admitted it so readily without apology or equivocation. You, you malicious old woman, she spat, her voice laced with pure venom, the pretense of sweetness utterly gone. You did this deliberately, to embarrass me, to ruin my day. Her self-absorption was breathtaking. It wasn't about Mark, or the baby, or the principle of inclusion. It was about her embarrassment, her ruined day. You excluded me, Maya, I said, my voice still quiet but firm. You made it clear I wasn't wanted, that my presence would be a detriment. Mark is the baby's father. It seemed too fitting. Did he at least have the opportunity to attend the celebration of his child, since you and David had apparently decided he wasn't necessary? He's not family, she shrieked. Not anymore. You know that. And I am? I countered softly. The question hung in the air, heavy with years of neglect and dismissal. She didn't answer immediately. She couldn't. Her carefully constructed narrative, the one where she was the perfect wife, the perfect mother-to-be, the innocent victim of a malicious mother-in-law, was crumbling around her. This changes everything, she said, her voice lower now, but still tight with fury. You've gone too far, Martha. Way too far. Have I? I asked, genuinely. Or have I simply highlighted the reality you've tried so hard to ignore? You wanted a perfect, sanitized version of a family celebration, one that excluded anyone who didn't fit your ideal. Life isn't like that, Maya. Families are messy. They include people you might not always get along with, people who have history, people who might not fit your perfect vibe. You wanted to erase me, and you wanted to erase Mark. I simply reminded you that we exist. There was another silence, longer this time. I could hear her breathing, quick and shallow. Don't expect to see this baby, she finally said, her voice cold and hard. You've made your choice. You're not welcome in our lives anymore. The threat hung in the air, by the ultimate exclusion. But it didn't land with the devastating force it might have once. Perhaps because I had already been excluded, piece by piece over so many years. Perhaps because the act of defiance, the reclaiming of my own power, had fortified me in a way I hadn't expected. That, I replied, my voice calm and steady, is your choice, Maya. Just as sending Mark the invitation was mine. Actions have consequences. You taught me that. I waited, but she didn't reply. After a moment I heard a click as she hung up. I placed my phone down, my hand surprisingly steady. The conversation had been difficult, painful in its own way, but there was a strange sense of clarity that settled over me afterwards. The unspoken conflict was now out in the open. The passive aggression had been replaced by outright hostility. The facade had dropped, and I was still standing. The next day was Sunday, the quiet after the storm. David called, his voice resigned and weary. Mom, he started, that familiar preamble. Maya's really upset. I know, I said. She called me last night. She told me what you said, he continued. About the invite. About Mark. He trailed off. Did Mark really show up? He asked, a note of genuine surprise in his voice. It seemed he hadn't even fully processed that part yet, likely caught up in Maya's immediate emotional fallout. Yes, David. He did. I confirmed. He received the invitation and chose to attend. Another silence. Maya said you sent it to him because she said you'd ruin the vibe, he finally asked, his voice sounding almost bewildered, as if hearing the words repeated made them sound as ridiculous and hurtful as they were. Yes, David, I said, my voice gentle, but unwavering. That's exactly why. Because she told me I wasn't wanted at my grandchild's baby shower, that my presence would spoil her party. So, I ensured someone else who was also deliberately excluded was given the opportunity to attend. But why would you do that? He asked, sounding genuinely puzzled. It was astonishing. Truly. his inability to grasp the years of hurt, the cumulative effect of their treatment. Why? I repeated, letting the single word hang there for a moment. Because I'm tired, David. Tired of being an afterthought. Tired of being treated like a problem to be managed. Tired of pretending that your mother doesn't matter, that her feelings are irrelevant. You and Maya have spent years making me feel small, making me feel like a burden, like I should be grateful for the crumbs of attention you occasionally throw my way. This exclusion from the baby shower, delivered with that cruel, dismissive phrase, Connie. It was the final straw. It wasn't about revenge, David. It was about reminding you both that I am a person with feelings, with a history, with a right to be treated with respect. You wanted to erase me from the picture? Fine, but I gotta decide who replaced me. He was quiet for a long time. I could hear him breathing on the other end. Mom, he finally said, his voice low. Maya. She's saying she doesn't want you involved with the baby? At all? I know, I said again. It hurt. A sharp, specific pain focused on the image of the grandchild I longed to hold, but beneath the pain was the quiet resolve. I had already mentally prepared for this. They couldn't hold the baby hostage as a guarantee of my good behavior forever. There would come a time when the child was older, when they might seek out connections independent of their parents' control. Or perhaps not. But I couldn't sacrifice my dignity, my self-respect, for the promise of access that might never materialize or would come at too high a cost. That is a consequence of your choices, David, I said. Yours and Maya's. You created this situation, not me. I simply reacted to the disrespect you showed me. So you're just okay with not seeing your grandchild? His voice held a note of disbelief, as if he couldn't comprehend that I would prioritize my self-worth over the conventional role of a doting, compliant grandmother. It's not okay, I admitted, my voice softening slightly. It breaks my heart, David, more than you know. But I won't beg for a place in your lives, or in my grandchild's life, if that place comes with conditions of silence, invisibility, and disrespect. I won't be treated like I have to earn the right to be family by accepting mistreatment. If that means I don't see the baby, then that is the price I have to pay for finally standing up for myself. It's a bitter price, but perhaps less bitter than living the rest of my life being walked over. He didn't argue further. There was nothing more to say. He mumbled something about needing to go and hung up. The call left me feeling drained, but not defeated. It was a bittersweet victory. I had asserted myself, shattered their control, forced a confrontation, but the cost was exactly what they had threatened. Potential exclusion from the future, from the new life I had been so looking forward to welcoming. Yet, in that moment, sitting in my quiet kitchen, the afternoon sun streaming through the window, I felt a profound sense of peace. I hadn't felt in years. I had acted, not out of blind rage, but out of a deep-seated need to reclaim my own story, my own worth. I was no longer the quiet, compliant woman who could be easily dismissed, easily hurt. I had shown them, and perhaps more importantly, shown myself, that I was still capable of agency, of making difficult choices, of drawing a line in the sand. The power dynamic had shifted, irrevocably. They had tried to diminish me by excluding me from their vibe, but in doing so, they had inadvertently given me the power to create a far more significant disruption, a disruption that exposed the shallowness of their own carefully constructed facade. News of the shower incident rippled through our small community. Mrs. Gable, ever the discreet conveyor of information, mentioned it delicately during our next tea session. Heard things got a bit lively. Dean. At the Miller shower, she said, her eyes holding a knowing glint. I simply smiled. Huh? I wouldn't know, I replied. I wasn't there. She paused, then said, some folks were surprised. Seeing Mark there, I mean. Haven't seen him around in ages. She looked at me, a question in her gaze. Life is full of surprises, isn't it, Martha? She mused. People you think are gone, sometimes they reappear. Sometimes, things you thought were settled, aching to turn out not to be. I nodded, feeling a warmth towards her quiet understanding. She didn't need the full story, didn't need confirmation of my role. She saw the currents beneath the surface, the unspoken narratives that shaped our lives. Her validation, subtle as it was, felt like a quiet acknowledgement that I wasn't the unreasonable one, that the dynamics she observed were indeed as skewed as I felt them to be. Life slowly found a new rhythm. David called less often. Our conversations were stilted, wary. The ease, minimal as it was, that had once existed between us was gone, replaced by the weight of the unspoken accusation and the potential consequences. I knew he was caught in the middle, pulled between his wife's demands and the remnants of his filial duty. But his continued inability to truly see my perspective, to acknowledge the years of hurt that had led to my action, cemented my resolve. I couldn't go back to the way things were. The break, though painful, was necessary. Maya made no further attempts to contact me directly, which was a relief. I assumed I was thoroughly blocked and erased from her life, and likely for now from the babies. It hurt, profoundly. The vision of holding a tiny grandchild, of sharing stories, of being a presence in their life, was a future I had cherished. That future was now uncertain, perhaps gone forever. This was the bittersweet part. The empowerment came at a cost. I had regained my voice, my dignity, but I had potentially lost a connection that was deeply important to me. Yet, the resignation wasn't despair. It was a quiet acceptance of the consequences of standing firm. I couldn't control their reaction, or the choices they made about the baby, but I could control my own actions, my own response to their mistreatment. And I had chosen not to be a doormat. Not anymore. The house felt different now. It was still my home, filled with memories, but it no longer felt like a place I had to apologize for, a place I had to constantly try to make acceptable for visitors who judged it by standards I didn't share. It was simply my space. It reflected my life, my choices. The worn armchair was comfortable. The slightly faded wallpaper held stories. The garden thrived under my care. These were real things, tangible things, unlike the curated perfection of Maya's world. I started to reconnect with old friends, people I had drifted away from during the years I was so focused on trying to fit into my son's new life. These connections were easy, comfortable, built on shared history and genuine affection, not on performance or obligation. We talked for hours, laughed, reminisced. It was a reminder of who I was outside of the narrow, demeaning role my son and daughter-in-law had assigned me. I was more than just a grandmother in waiting. I was Martha, a woman with her own life, her own experiences, her own worth. The experience of sending the invitation and dealing with the fallout had stripped away the layers of politeness and pretense that had masked the true nature of my relationship with David and Maya. It was painful to see the naked disrespect, the casual cruelty, but it was also freeing. The illusion was gone. I no longer had to waste energy trying to decipher their passive aggression or agonizing over how to please them. The conflict was out in the open, and while it meant a rupture, it also meant clarity. I no longer had to tiptoe around their fragile egos or fear their subtle punishments. I had faced their worst threat, exclusion from the baby's life. And while it hurt, it hadn't destroyed me. I was still here, still standing, still capable of living my life with purpose and quiet strength. The scar was there, the potential loss of a grandchild, a permanent ache, but it was a clean scar, not the festering wound of ongoing internalized betrayal. And the feeling of reclaiming my own voice, my own power, was a potent antidote to the years of feeling diminished. They had underestimated me. They had thought I was weak, easily manipulated, willing to tolerate any indignity for the sake of maintaining a connection, however tenuous. They had thought they could discard me and suffer no consequences. They were wrong. Ruin the vibe? Perhaps I had, but in the process I had saved myself. The story wasn't over, of course. Life continues. Relationships evolve. or sometimes they simply cease. I didn't know what the future held regarding David, Maya, or my grandchild. Perhaps, years down the line, there might be a bridge built, initiated by the child, seeking out the history their parents tried to hide, or perhaps not. But I was no longer waiting, no longer hoping for their approval or their invitation back into a life that wasn't meant for me. I was building my own life, on my own terms, and that, in itself, was a victory. The house, quiet and filled with sun, felt like a sanctuary. My sanctuary. I was finally home, not just in the physical sense, but within myself. The bitterness remained, a trace element in the complex alloy of my emotions, but it was tempered by the empowering knowledge that I had chosen dignity over subjugation. They wanted a perfect, uncomplicated narrative, a flawless vibe. I had introduced reality, and sometimes reality is the most powerful force of all. The chapter closed, perhaps permanently on the version of family I had tried so hard to fit into, but the book of my life was still being written, and now my hands were firmly on the pen. The final pages would be mine to write, filled not with quiet resignation but with the quiet strength of a woman who had finally found her voice, even if it meant ruining someone else's party. The invitation still sat in my drawer, the original one. Sometimes I would take it out, trace the embossed edges, look at the sickly sweet design. It was no longer a symbol of my exclusion, but a reminder of the moment I chose to stop being excluded, to stop being defined by others' limitations of me. It was a reminder that even the quietest person can make a statement, and that sometimes the most powerful actions are the ones delivered with a silent hand and a clear heart. The baby was born. I heard eventually through Mrs. Gable, who had heard it through her book club friend Eleanor, Mark's mother, a healthy baby boy. I sent a small, neutral card, addressed simply to Baby Miller, with a tiny hand-knitted hat I had finished. No return address, no name inside, just the hat and the card, a silent acknowledgement of a life brought into the world, a life I hoped one day might know the full story, not just the one its parents preferred to tell. It was a small gesture, perhaps futile, but it felt necessary, a whisper into the void, a tiny thread cast out into the future. My life had changed. The hurt lingered, a dull ache, but it was no longer debilitating. It was just a part of the landscape now, like an old scar. The tense anticipation of the fallout had faded, replaced by a calm certainty. I had done what I needed to do. I had spoken my truth, not with shouting but with action. And in doing so, I had finally set myself free. The price was steep, the relationship with my son forever altered, the connection to my grandchild uncertain, but the freedom from the constant striving, the constant hurt, the constant feeling of inadequacy was invaluable. I looked at my garden, the flowers reaching for the sun. They didn't need anyone's permission to grow, to bloom, to exist fully and beautifully. Neither did I. I was here rooted, resilient, and finally, truly my own.